Yes, hello everybody, and welcome to another edition of Full Course Yellow. It's In Pit Lane's weekly get-together, just a bit of a chat about the world of motorsport and all sorts of amazing and wonderful things that are happening. Thanks for joining us on a very, very sad week for us here in Melbourne, of course, where we all woke up to the shock news yesterday that the Commonwealth Games apparently still exist. And the last Commonwealth Games I took any, I was thinking this today. Well, probably not for long. I mean, the last Commonwealth Games that I took any notice of was Christchurch, which I think was about 1972 or something. But anyway, we'll see we'll see how we go. We'll see how we go there. But anyway, it's not happening now. The interesting thing, and we might talk about this a little later, is what this might mean for a certain large piece of infrastructure that has been widely predicted down at Avalon. Because, I think under the circumstances, there's a lot of noise happening somewhere.
I think
that would be me snorting in disgust.
That would be.
And I'll turn the camera on in a second.
Well, too. Yeah, you might have to turn your mic off for a second. Well,
yep, and we'll add Stilly to the stream as well. So So anyway, it might be interesting to. Might be interesting to see what how they would justify spending huge amounts of money on a new venue down at Avalon after deciding to pull the plug on all these new other sporting venues and this competition that I don't think anybody outside of as someone said today, well, nobody outside of the Commonwealth cares about the Commonwealth Games. Nobody much inside the Commonwealth cares about the Commonwealth Games. So let's see how that goes. But we don't know what that means at this stage for the wonderful world of the Avalon circuit. Box is saying it's slowly getting used to the Wednesday night events. Yeah, you and me both, Box. It's still early and it still feels very strange, but. It works for everybody else, so we'll plough on regardless, at least for the moment. So let's have a chat about what's been happening and what is happening, and of course coming up this weekend, the return of Formula One, and a young guy called Daniel Ricciardo is coming back. So this will obviously be a lot of extra interest. I notice all the adverts on Foxtel are all sort of jumping up and down and saying, the return of Ricciardo, be watching. It's Ricciardo, Daniel is back. And are we setting ourselves up for a great disappointment considering the
Could be,
cars
just
driving?
a bit.
I'm going to add 10 seconds and go for Hell for Leather. An article from one of our favourite news outlets, who's a great advocate for our show, Brett. We talked about a little while ago. Released an article this afternoon, just after 5 o'clock, where Christian Horner is as quoted as saying, Daniel is angling for Sergio's job.
Yes, I did. In fact, I've got that. That reminds me, I've set up the ticker because that is there. So saying that he's put forward the proposition that that when Sergio's when and if Sergio's position in the main team is no longer tenable, or they decide to move on and wish him luck in his future endeavours, that Daniel will be sitting there and waiting and ready to jump into the seat, which makes sense, really. I mean, I think we all knew that. I mean, not much point of him turning up and running around, midfield or worse with AlphaTauri if that's his only interest. He might as well have tried to been happier to stay with McLaren or something. But I imagine that this is just a holding position at the moment, just to sort of say, hey, I'm still here, I can still do this, and when something better comes up, whether it's with Red Bull or someone else, and there could be something coming up at Ferrari fairly soon, because the Italian media are saying that they're going to be very surprised if Mr. Leclerc is going to be with them possibly next year or the year after.
I suppose Ricciardo's a very Italian-sounding name.
It is.
Well, if they pronounce it correctly, yes. I think it'd be interesting once he goes to Ferrari whether he suddenly becomes Ricciardo again. But,
Ricciardo
That's what
or
I'll put on my
Ricciardo?
car. I'll put Ricciardo on my car.
You've
Yes,
got to make sure it's in sign language, guys, with the appropriate inflection. Ricciardo. Ricciardo. But further
When
to
you say
your point, Brent.
pronunciation, that includes the hand gesture, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Further to your point, Brent, regarding the local media coverage and the promotion of the viewing opportunities for that race on all of the streaming platforms and pay TV services, you're not implying that the Australian motorsport audience might be somewhat parochial, are you?
I'm suggesting that the Australian media may be somewhat parochial. They've certainly jumped on board. I mean, that's all I can talk about at the moment. It's like, that was the sort of headline.
Give them something
Not
else to
one, but
write
two
about.
Australians.
Well, if Ricciardo's going for Red Bull in 2024, that makes it interesting if supposedly Liam Lawson's guaranteed the seat for 2025.
Yeah, well, I mean, and Liam, of course, won on the weekend again, so he's doing his bit in Super Formula. Did very well again, obviously winning, and is back in contention for that championship. And he's basically saying that I'm prepared to bide my time in order to make this happen.
Well, question: if you're Liam Lawson, with the current state of AlphaTauri or whatever it's known as next year, because with all of these things swirling in the background with, potentially Red Bull, obviously the death of Dietrich Mateschitz, the potential that whoever's looking after all the Red Bull sporting properties decides, to offload the team, the chance that obviously the Honda powertrain connection disappears in a year or two, and the sheer fact that it's gone from being the 6th best team to the 10th best team in half a year. Is this really, is this potentially a poison chalice for Liam Lawson to take up? I mean, at the moment he was, doing amazingly well in DTM for that season. He got parachuted in there. He's been doing amazingly well in Super Formula. Does he really need to, go into Formula One with, AlphaTauri and a low ebb? Is he far better off, pursuing other opportunities as a Red Bull contracted driver, doing other things where he can be competitive, and then coming in at a moment where the team or whichever team he goes into, it is the right time?
Well, he's still fairly young. How old is Lawson now? I mean, it's not as if he's looking at, on his last legs. I mean, he's not a kid, but at the same time, he's got time on his side. So if he's, and I suppose it also depends on how long.
He's 21.
21. Well,
he's
got years,
he's past it now. I mean, too old for Formula One now.
Yeah.
His
He's got one
DTM
foot in the
season was 2
grave,
years
hasn't he?
ago now, so he was still a teenager.
What do you
when he
reckon,
almost kicked over.
Brett?
What was that?
1 foot in the grave?
Well, some people would say so. Yes, I mean, I think it's the problem is, I mean, the longer you leave it does seem sort of out of sight, out of mind, because if there's a whole bunch of these kids coming up in Formula 2, and they'll be looking at a lot of them because they see them every week. They may not, Liam Lawson, despite what he's doing in Japan, might not be sort of, like front and centre. They might have also said, oh, well, he's obviously signed with Red Bull and they'll use him. Well, if Red Bull haven't got a spot for him, it could be one of those situations where he'll get to 23 or 24 and Red Bull will say, look, it's like the wrestling creative has nothing for you. It's like, I'm sorry, there's no room at the inn. And,
well, isn't the usual practice to then shop them to Williams, regardless of the junior program you're in?
Yeah, well, I suppose that's what they've sort of said in the past, and they've done that with a few drivers where they've said, well, okay, if we can't provide you with something, we will certainly assist you, and we certainly won't stand in your way. If you want to
is a
go
very
elsewhere.
good pathway in financial business these days. Nicholas Latifi, who only retired very recently, did you see the article? He is now hasn't raced much at all since leaving Formula One, is now starting his MBE in London. And not racing.
I think that's an MBA. Yeah, I think that's an MBA actually. I think that, you've got to study for your MBA. The King gives you an MBA.
No, sorry,
yes, and we should of course refer to him by his actual appropriate name, which is Goatifi. Thank you very much.
Yes. So I think that he will. I think he's obviously just decided that he can see the future there, and he needs something to fall back on, which a lot of them do. I mean, if it's like the footballers, like any young talented sports person. I mean, if you spend your time at the top, or like if you don't quite get to the top, and you can't trade off your career and your name for the rest of your life, and suddenly you turn around and at the age of late 20s, early to mid 30s, you're suddenly not superstar Johnny footballer anymore, or whatever sport you're playing, and it's like okay, well, geez, what do I do now? I mean, you're gonna have a short. Like the good thing is now they've got so many sports car options. It's like that's the thing now. I mean, the World Endurance Championship, I think somebody said on the weekend with Nick De Vries, it was like just drive down the road and find a WEC drive somewhere, because there's plenty of them out there, and they're probably very keen to get a young Dutch driver.
That's a awkward segue moment, because of course the professional sports car driver pool is about to have quite a number of people come off contract at the end of this season, courtesy of of Audi Sport announcing that they are terminating their factory backing of their customer racing programs. So this is any of they still supply cars and still supply parts and engineering, but they're ceasing the sales and professional driver support for TCR, GT4, GT3, and GT2. In connection with the discontinuing of the R8 as the premier road car in the Audi stable.
And there are some seriously good drivers.
But this is really old. This is really old news. Well, we were talking about this over 12 months ago, and it was all being pulled left, right, and centre. And I can't see why it's such a big furor the last week. We're losing our support. Everyone knew it was happening. It's not. It's been announced dozens and dozens of times, at least for 12 months. So I can't understand why there's been articles written on it, uproar written on it, and quotations written on it. Everyone knew it was happening. There was set dates, even. So,
Doc, how many racing teams or racing programs does the Volkswagen Group actually need? I mean, Porsche are their headline for racing. Do they need one for Audi? Do they really need it? Does it bring anything to the brand?
We've discussed this before, and I think we've actually agreed as well too, Stuart. So, but I can't understand what the bloody carry on is in the last week. We all knew this for so long.
And let's ask Stuart's cat what he thinks.
She.
They. We're not going to. You can't just presume pronouns with regards to persons that don't identify as human.
She had a catch scan, ultrasound a couple of weeks ago. So trust me, the vet knows.
By the way, Stuart, you're very hot.
Always great to see you. Do you have a Stuart spray this week? Do you have usually it's F1 or something or other? Have you got a Stuart spray lined up this week?
No, mate, I've been too under the weather to even watch a lot of things. I'm happy I caught the highlights for Gizzy. And
what about
well, actually, there's somebody to give a spray to. The person who came second on that racing, blaming the tyres when clearly Gisborne looked after his brakes, or Van Gisborne looked after his brakes, and could still stop. Whereas everybody else was slamming into the walls. Hello, look after the brakes.
Well, I think that's what a lot of them, that's what a lot of them said. I mean, people like Denny Hamlin and a few others basically said, this guy had the strict racing equipment.
If somebody who's there in their full-time drive gets past under brakes twice in one lap, it's not the tyres.
Oh yeah,
I'm
but
with you.
either way, I mean, we knew. That's
I'm
why
glad
we
the
knew
Supercar is back.
when we were talking about. That's why we knew that like when I watched it and he was like 18th, and it was like then a couple of laps later he was 13th or 14th. That's when I knew straight away he was going to win because we've seen him do it time and time and time again. The guy knows how to look after his tyres, knows how to look after his car, and he times it to perfection. And he did it again on the streets of Chicago.
By the way, now speaking of other drivers who've had a good one, go looking on YouTube. Murph was at, I think it's Brands Hatch recently.
Brands Hatch, yeah.
Yep.
And one of the UK teams over there owns his 2009 V8 Supercar, and they got him to
Sprint
do
Gas
some guest
Commodore.
laps. It is fabulous to watch from the onboard and watch him start to hit the braking points. You see how much faster the V8 supercars were compared to the Super Tourers of the era. It just
I haven't
blows
looked at it,
past them.
Stuart. I will have a look. Did he commentate like he usually does sometimes too?
No, he didn't. No, it was just
damn,
raw engine noise and gear changes. It's amazing to listen to.
He's usually very funny. He adds some humour when he's relaxed and still throwing the thing around
outside of the car and on the radio. On the radio, he was he spoke Australian.
or New Zealand. we better get in quick. Better get in quick for all our New Zealand
you know what some say more reserved countries happen to think of the native use of language in Australia.
Yes, well, we know that. We know that well with personal experience.
One of my favourites, just briefly, I agree with you. One of my favourites a few years ago, they pulled it apart afterwards. It didn't last very long, is when they got that limited edition Sandman wagon and they threw a V6 twin turbo in that too, in the Red Bull. And they did a promotional video for that. And Murph was driving that, and he absolutely threw it around them at Bathurst. That was lots of fun to watch as well, too. That was one of my favourites. So yeah, he's good at doing
good 11s for distance.
Sorry?
Yeah, good 11s for distance.
Yeah, he's good at doing cameos, Murph, and he adds some flavour to it when he does some commentary. They should get him to do commentary more on it as well, too, because he has a bit of fun with it when he's relaxed.
So just going back to Ricardo, let's put our prognostication hats on, if you will.
Ferrari.
Well,
Ferrari.
Well, but not that far ahead. I just want to look ahead. I'll be happy for this weekend. Let's grab a number, Pete. How do you think you'll do, and where do you think you'll finish?
About 6th or 7th.
Oh, you're okay.
Yeah.
Bold.
He'd be. I think everybody would be delighted if he did that. I think Daniel would be over the move. AlphaTauri would be absolutely ecstatic, and Formula One would be thrilled. We'd all be happy. That'd be there. Stuart, we'll go work our way around. Stuart, where does he finish on? Sunday?
Top 10 if the engine doesn't die on him.
Okay, Mark.
I think. Well, it's Hungary, isn't it? So it's it's not it's a circuit that doesn't penalise slower cars as much as others. So I think there's an opportunity for Dan to certainly get points, and points has been very thin on the ground for AlphaTauri this year.
Doc, what do you think? Whereabouts?
Oh, I thought you were going around the room. Pete was next.
No, Pete. We got Pete first. Pete was on first.
I'll go a little bit outside, a little bit of lateral thinking outside the square. I think he will make Q2. I think if he can use that confidence he's got from some simming and also some testing, and he walks in with that, he has that big smile. So I think he'll make Q2. So he will start outside the top 10. As Stuart indicated. However, I think if we do lose a couple through maybe through some crashes, maybe through some retirements in any way, shape, or form, I think he'll scrape in top 10 as well too. But also, I'll put ninth. I'll have to put a figure on it. I'm not going to dodge the bullet. Ninth.
Richard.
I reckon between 10 and 15. But I think he'll make the podium on next Flick's Drive to Survive. not a problem.
Well, they'll be thrilled about it because he's so
That's
good.
right.
Yeah, he's so,
Oh,
he's
that's
so
Reese is
great
like a
episode out
ghost.
of
Nobody, he's invisible.
They'll get the lead up to when the announcement is. They'll get the announcement week and when in his first race, and then they'll get the follow up as well too. They'll get 3 episodes.
And the good
right.
news is, yeah, the good news is perfect timing. I mean, with the writers and actors strike in Hollywood at the moment, they're looking for as much reality, material as they can get, and if they can get a really good season of Drive to Survive and a few more ratings, I think that he'll.
So you're saying
He'll
that
host the
Formula One
Oscars
is not
next year.
scripted entertainment?
Yeah, well, at the moment, Dave, what's your prediction?
I reckon the two Alpha Tauris will be 13th and 14th.
Yeah, that seems to be about the side. I mean, Mark Madcow is saying about 13th. The virtual are saying 12th to 13th as well. Box is saying 11th on the track, but we'll get 10 with someone getting a 5. Yes, very true, Box. Yes, it depends on how many people get track limits. Yeah, I'm thinking if he scores a point, I think they can be everybody can be very, very happy with it. But yeah, I'm thinking around that sort of 11th to 12th. Mark as well, but it'll be something else to watch on the weekend. It'll be something that we can have a look at, and we'll get a lot of interest and gives us something to talk about. And hopefully that Daniel does the right thing and puts in a good performance. We'll have something to talk about next week as well. So,
having said all of that, someone will bomb dive him into turn 1 on lap 1, and he'll be done.
Yeah, probably Yuki Tsunoda.
Mods on him, Mark.
No, I
Well, he's had a Red Bull teammate do something similar in the past, hasn't he?
Yeah. Well, you imagine Sergio. I mean, with his current qualifying form, perhaps Sergio will be looking to pass him early in the race to come
he
back
won't
through.
dive bombing because Sergio needs to finish the race and score in a respectable position himself. So if
Sergio's behind Daniel. Sorry.
Yes, I think Sergio will be aiming about worrying about his own best performance and keeping his seat, but through some proactive driving rather than actually worrying about what other people are doing. I think he's and that's the best way he can do it. Look forward, not look back, and that way he may actually keep his seat for another season. And Daniel might either have another year in AlphaTauri, which seems strange, but Christian might say. It comes down to, well, it's only a few races. Daniel's cherry ripe again, but at the moment, Sergio is still maintaining his seat. The oil money's still flowing, so we'll run with status quo. And then poor old Liam Lawson has to wait another year or gets farmed out to someone else again.
Well, let's see how that goes. Pete, what do you think? I mean, apart from that coming up on the weekend, any other Formula One news around that we want to chat about before we move on?
No, I don't think so.
It's been very quiet, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Apart from Daniel, of course.
Yeah.
There is the people that have left
Goodwood.
Red Bull.
They're going to try in qualifying, mandating. So in Q1 you use hard tyres, Q2 you use medium, and Q3 you use soft.
They're going to make some changes. Pirelli and they're going to bring in some changes. They were going to do this originally at the Imola round, which of course didn't happen. So now they're going to try it this weekend. So it's a reduced allocation of tyres, which they're saying is once again cost cutting and also being environmentally friendly. So there will be a reduced allocation of there'll be a reduced allocation of tyres for drivers on the weekend. So let's have a look at how that goes. It might add a little bit of spice to the race as well, because you imagine that if they're mandated with what tyres that they can actually run on, it means that those who go out early in the race are going to have a bigger supply of fresh tyres for the race itself. in terms of perhaps at least another set of softs which are going to be sort of unused. So we'll see how that plays into it. So there's another sort of thing to have a look at in terms of the strategy and everything.
So my interesting take on what's currently scrolling, other way, this way, along along the scroll underneath, is so McLaren has mentioned, or it's been mentioned about McLaren with their wind tunnel for the last couple of years, that they were having correlation errors. So they design parts using CFD. They'd run them in a virtual wind tunnel and get one set of data. Then they'd run them in a physical wind tunnel, a scale wind tunnel, and they'd get a different set of data, and the data wouldn't align with each other. So they often had difficulty developing a lot of upgrade parts or setting the aerodynamic concept for their vehicles. And so one of the long-term things that Zach Brown's been invested in at the McLaren Technology Centre is the upgrade of the wind tunnel. And so I think it's rather telling that all the bits that McLaren's bolted on the last couple of races have made a substantial impact on the car. So I think that bodes well for the future of McLaren. That, and by the same token, we've seen very similar things said by James Voles when he's gone into Williams, stating, these guys are working with technology that's 20 years behind the current standard in F1. So if McLaren and Williams are putting in the performances that they're putting in with what they openly admit is out of date or behind the standard technology, I think it bodes well for the future if those teams can, continue their facilities investments.
Yeah, we'll also see if whether it was whether McLaren's performance was a bit of a and also Williams to an extent was a bit of a flash in the pan at Silverstone, simply because of the nature of that circuit and the fast, open flowing, high speed nature of that track. So we know that it looks at the moment that both of them are pretty quick in a straight line and with the wide open corners. So whether that continues, whether that flows over to the Hungaro ring is going to be another thing. But
it's been two events, Brett. So they both cars performed significantly better by their own standard from, say, 3 or 4 races ago at the last Grand Prix. And then when the cars were given the upgrades for singly to obviously Albon and Lando, they both performed that round individually the round before. And then when the two cars, teammates were given I'm not going to go names, but given the upgrades as well too, the whole team improved overall. So I don't think you might get straight out crazy top 5 or maybe anything like that, but it will obviously, they have made some significance. And what it does, it actually makes it more interesting mid-pack throughout the race, instead of the cameras and the commentators just maybe focusing to a certain extent on some of the more prominent drivers up the front, or a prominent driver who has had some bad luck or bad management and is in mid-pack. Well, then they're going to be battling out with guys that have got some upgraded material there that can match it with them, and it's going to really, could provide some more mixed results in the next couple of rounds.
Yeah, well, it looks to be like Max is obviously comfortably out in front at the moment, but I think Pete, you were saying like in the last few weeks that everything was saying, it's been so boring, but everything behind Max has actually been pretty good in terms of racing. In fact, there's been some fantastic battles going on sort of further down the field, hasn't there?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. So, but anyway, that's coming up. That's coming up this weekend. By the way, speaking of McLaren, did anybody have a look at Goodwood over the weekend and see the Solus GT? That's an interesting looking car.
Goodwood was
will be onto it for us.
Yeah, aren't sports cars supposed to have 2 seats?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily.
Why should that be?
Oh, okay.
I mean,
technically, in American sports car racing.
Well,
look, you can fit 2 people in a McLaren if your girlfriend's really, really skinny and she doesn't mind sitting behind you.
You've driven a McLaren,
But
have you, Richard?
Richard, the problem with that is that adds weight to the chassis.
Oh, yes, I agree with you. No argument from
being
me.
in the car by yourself.
Just put her in a taxi and let her catch up to you.
The interesting thing was that even in the wet, that McNulty electric car that won last year was still terrifyingly fast, and I think ended up, because they didn't enter the official competition this year, but even in the demonstration runs that they did in less than ideal conditions, they were still around 8 seconds faster up the hill than the winning car. So that thing is just a weapon.
I was more a fan of Rowan Atkinson going up in the
Yaris.
In the Yaris with the hydrogen engine, proving that you can be both environmentally conscious and have the car make the right noises.
And we also had Sebastian Vettel as well, going up in the classic in the Williams, powered by so-called environmentally friendly synthetic fuel.
Doing environmentally sensitive donuts.
Yes.
Run up the hill.
Pumping environmentally friendly burnt rubber into the air, as you should.
Well, I'm sure he did the run on green tyres at one point.
Oh, very good, Dave.
Yeah, so as Roy's saying, hydrocarbons generated hydrogen under with the addition of cost $6 per litre. Well, I mean, that's not actually, when you look at it, that's not ridiculously
compared to some racing fuels.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
considering how much hydrogen fuel is going to cost.
Yeah,
have the same economies as ethanol out of the US, where it takes 3 gallons of oil to make 1 gallon of ethanol. They don't stack up in the long term.
Well, yeah, a lot of them don't. I mean, it's the law of diminishing returns, isn't it? I mean, you can't. It's like but it's like any sort of so-called environmentally friendly fuel. I mean, the amount of energy that goes into producing, the clean energy that runs in your all-electric vehicle, is, it's not that clean. I mean, all it's doing at the moment is shifting the base of where the pollution's coming from.
Yes, I'm driving clean because
Go on.
Yeah.
Shifting chairs on the Titanic, basically, isn't it?
But interesting.
Are we allowed to make jokes about the Titanic again now? Are we allowed to make those references now? Have we passed that point? I
think the statute of limitation. I think in the case of multi-billionaires, the statute of limitations on that ran out about 17 seconds after it happened.
Yeah, the Titanic ones have never stopped.
Dave, let's just say we follow a sport where people understand how carbon fiber should be used.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that. Well, that's my fear about the
upside down airplanes.
But they're also
Inside
making
out more.
They're also making real aeroplanes out of it. That's why the Dreamliner. I'm sort of I'm a bit dodgy on. It's fantastic at the moment, but we do know. I mean, anybody who was at the Phillip Island Historic the year that that Ferrari simply just broke in half on the main straight will remember how quickly carbon fibre can sort of fall apart once something goes wrong.
Once it delaminates, throw it in the bin.
Yep. Which is one of the reasons that we won't, in the future, we may not see as many of the old cars running around in historic racing, because there is the possibility of unless
somebody wants to make new tubs.
Yeah, and then you've got some, in which case they're going to have to be a lot more flexible, which they are. I mean, in Europe, of course, they're way more flexible in terms of what's running. A couple of cars that ran at the Le Mans Classic, including some of those classic Bentleys, were continuation cars, as they call them. They were made by Bentley. They were made to the exact same specifications and plans and all the rest of it, but they were not the original.
Jags now.
Yeah, the D-type Jags and even Escorts. There's a whole bunch of Mark 1 Escorts. If you want to go and if you want to spend enough money in England, you can buy a brand new RS 2000 Mark 1 Escort, and they look fantastic. They're gorgeous looking things.
Oh, even the
if anyone wants to buy Valiant body parts to the same standard, I would happily buy parts for a VC Valiant.
What's the guy from our Wheeler Dealers? Not the original guy. The Ant took over as the mechanic, and he was doing.
Isn't he?
He's actually he's a brilliant mechanic. I've only watched a few bits and pieces of Wheeler Dealers when I've been channel surfing before, and I can't believe
in partnership with it's an XF1 driver for a new sports car.
Oh, most probably. So I think after he left Top Gear,
the Radford.
That's
anyway, Ant is absolutely brilliant in pulling down. I just happened to see last week, I think it was, he had a mid-90s RS Escort, similar to what Brett was saying before, and he ripped the guts out of it completely, pulled it all down, and then just like it was like a rag doll on the bench there, pulled the turbo completely apart, put a new kit in it, put it all back together. Probably didn't even need an instruction manual to do it. Knew it all off by heart and threw it back in the car, and the thing whistled Dixie. So Ant's he's absolutely brilliant. But yeah, check out that episode on Wheeler Dealers. I think it's a blue RS Escort, mid-90s, 96 I think it was. You're on mute, Brett, if you're talking.
What can we get away with?
Oh,
do it.
Kill on mute. Now. Off we go.
There he is.
Yeah, well, Gordon. I was going to say Gordon Murray's Escort as well. There's stories about on YouTube about Gordon Murray's Escort, which is a stunning thing as well. So it's lovely cars. The old the Escorts. And by the way, speaking of Escorts, he's eating at the moment. I was going to fire off a question. I was going to fire off an appropriate question to Dave. But he's got his mouth full at the moment. When are we going to see? When are we going to see Mike's Escort out again at some stage?
Probably when there's an appropriate category to run it in, where it's competitive or it's able to perform in the manner in which it was intended. So I'm a little bit hazy on whether it's the 71 car or the 72 car, because bear in mind that in 1971 the Australian Touring Car Championship ran to improved production rules, but in 1972 onwards it ran to series production rules, and then it went on to Group C and then following. So in 1971 it had a different gear. It was a BDA, and it had flares and all this kind of stuff. And then for 1972 it was much closer to original. So it had a twin cam, so an 8-valve engine, not a 16-valve engine. It had standard body panels on it, much closer to what you'd call like a 3E car as opposed to a 3J car, if we're using modern analogies. But yeah, that car is in the possession of my uncle Christopher, who at the moment, from a racing perspective, has busied himself with acquiring, restoring, and racing Group A Sierras, and recently acquired through an auction a couple of 5-litre touring cars, so a mid-90s Perkins Commodore and Scott Pye's Walkinshaw Andretti United car from would have been 2018 that he won a race at the Australian Grand Prix. So when you've got all of those cars in your stable and you get to go race those, but you also get to go race your 1960s Mustang California Special right-hand drive in the US in vintage Trans Am racing, there's not quite as much opportunity to go racing a BDG engined Escort. Of course, when that car was upgraded and prepared for Touring Car Masters in terms of its presentation and preparation, but now obviously that series has kind of moved on. There's no more of the small cars anymore. It's all basically big engine cars,
which is a real shame. Because that was one of the best racing was in Touring Car Masters, when you had the big American muscle, and you had the early the GDHOs and the XU1s and all the rest of it. And but at the back you had Escorts and Alphas and like you used to have in the old days.
Yeah.
And don't forget that Tilly's running a rather silly VF Valiant.
Well, it's with a silly engine now because I mean it used to be powered by a Valiant engine, but it's not any. I think that's one of the problems for me with the touring car masters is they are now floor pan sports sedans basically. They're not running. There's not even any pretension anymore that they've got anything to do with the cars that ran in the day. You've got Chev powered Capris and that's their sports sedans as far as I'm concerned.
So speaking of competitors that are feeling aggrieved at the rules changing and the seas shifting around them, I noticed one of the things in the ticker was the discussion from the Super 2 and Super 3 teams being advised, oh, by the way, we're going to change you over to E75 for the rest of the season, which is very strange to have that announced in the middle of a season when you've already committed to a certain engine program and a certain budgets and a certain specification of vehicle. That's a very weird change to be making mid-season.
And the worrying thing is that they were going to have the meeting today, apparently, about it. And the Supercars cancelled the meeting, so they don't really know. It hasn't been explained to them because, as they've said, because it's in the middle of the season. Apparently, it's not a trivial matter, and they're even concerned about what effect there might be on things like the fuel bladders in the fuel cells, because they said that fuel
lines, all sorts of things.
Yeah, all sorts of problems.
We went through all this. So I was actually working for a high performance parts distributor in 2009 when the teams were making the changeover to E85. And it was a dramatic changeover because if you're running a pure alcohol fuel, you do one certain thing with all the O-rings that you use in all the fuel system. You do a certain thing with both the fuel bladder and the foam that goes inside the bladder tank. You have to do, and you put a certain lifing on your fuel system components. So your filters, your pumps, your injectors. Now, if you're running full gasoline or full petrol, you do one thing. If you're running a full alcohol, you do something else. The difficulty with E85 is that because it's a mixture, so called E85 for those that are playing at home, because it's a mixture of 85% ethanol. In the case of supercars, it's usually an ethanol component from a renewable resource. In years past, when it started, it was coming from the byproduct of CSR, the sugar refineries. It was coming from molasses. Later on, it was coming from the byproduct of the wheat industry through Manildra. Not entirely certain where the ethanol component's coming from now with the E75. And then the balance of the...
Sorry, I'm just going to say the Amazon rainforest.
And then the balance of the fuel is 15%, or previously when it was the 85, it's been 15% of a 98 octane regular unleaded petrol that's refined from crude oil. Obviously, the change this year.
I was at CSR Yarraville during the middle of this week. I might be back the next couple of weeks. I'll ask for all of us on behalf of you, Stilly. There you go. I'm doing a little bit of work for them.
Cool. Obviously, the change for Gen 3 this year was that as they changed the control engine packages, where all the Chevrolet teams use a single source supplied engine from KRE, and all the Ford teams use a single source supplied engine from Herod Performance, they made a change they increased the gasoline essentially per portion of the fuel and reduced the ethanol content. One of the consequences of that has been that obviously the teams have had to retune and replace a lot of their service fittings in all of their fuel rigs because all the O-rings and everything had to be serviced because they were essentially conditioned to one particular type of fuel. And if you go and you run it through a different type of fuel, it actually shocks the seals, and then they either contract or they expand and they don't seal the way that they were intended. So oftentimes, when you're changing fuel blends, you're actually replacing like for like. You're not going from a Booner to a Viton O-ring or vice versa. You're replacing like for like, but basically every single component that could possibly be used in a car that's going to be touched by fuel, you're replacing it with the exact same component, just one that hasn't been in contact with that particular fuel blend before.
Would the fuel lines really have to be just flushed out themselves?
No, because most of the fuel lines now, although they might be a have a braid on the outside, like a woven braid. They're actually non-metallic on the inside. They're either like
that was
like
my
a
question,
PTFE,
really. So
polytetrafluoroethylene. So they're basically like a plastic or a polymer flexible coupling. So when it's a metal hard line, like a steel or an aluminium hard line, it's not too much of a problem. But anywhere where there's flexible connections, so from the body lines to the engine, which is normally a flexible connection, then you've got connections on the engines themselves, between a left and right hand fuel rail, any of the fittings in the rear of the car where they're going from the hard line fuel lines into the fuel cell, bearing in mind now that in Super 2 and Super 3, all the cars are the 2013 on car of the future or new generation cars. So they're running the saddle tank where the rear seat would be. So all of the fuel fittings and everything are kept inside the tank. And that tank and all the fittings inside it were always and only engineered around an E85 fuel mix inside them.
So, in summation, anything that's not metal, you have to replace. And
in addition to that, because the fuel is different, the manner in which it burns is different. So one of the consequences of that is we've got flames back. But the consequence of that in the car is that the manner in which you fight that fire in terms of the flame retardant chemical that goes in the extinguisher bottle is different again. And because it's a different extinguisher, it's different lines, it's different fittings. It's not just a case of draining the fuel out and filling it up. If it was, we wouldn't be in the situation we're in now.
Dave, you've mentioned the extinguisher there, which is the ancillary equipment. What about the rest of the equipment for the teams, for the fuel rigs, especially at the endurance races? Doesn't all that need to be changed as well?
So the Super 2 and Super 3, they don't have any races with refueling. So for the Supercars teams, you would have noticed that in Newcastle, there were a lot of teams doing repairs in pit lane on the Thursday and the Friday, getting their fuel rigs ready. Because one of the one of the things that did carry over from previous generation to new generation was the fuel rig. They changed the coupler where it coupled onto the car, but a lot of the hoses and fittings stayed the same. So a lot of that had to be replaced as well. What they call their workshop fuel drum, which is basically a 200-litre drum. It's normally on a scale, so you can measure the fuel as it goes into the car and out of the car. It's on a rotary hand pump. Usually you'd have to do a seal kit on the rotary pump as well, because it'll have seals in it that become conditioned to a certain kind of fuel. You'll have a lot of flexible lines that you hook up to quick disconnect couplings to cycle the fuel in and out of the car, so you know exactly how much fuel's left in it. And when you fill the car, you want to know exactly how much fuel's gone into it. When they put the fuel in, they actually weigh it, because they work off kilograms of fuel. They don't work off volume, because volume varies with temperature. So the saving grace for Super 2 and Super 3 is they don't have to do any in-race refueling, which of course anything that involves refueling dramatically increases the cost and complexity for any of their racing, particularly on the crewing side. You would have remembered the last couple of years, or the years before COVID, where they had that Super 2 endurance race at Bathurst. What they'd actually do is they'd have the teams would be paired off with a Supercars team, or a main game team, and the main game team would conduct the refueling with their actual fuel rig, because the cars were running the same fuel, running the same fuel couplers. And then once the refueling was completed, then the Super 2 team would then go ahead and change the tyres on the car as per the compulsory pit stop requirements. So, the Super 2 and the Super 2 teams that have picked up, the last year's ZB Commodores and FN Ford Mustangs, they've already made a sizable investment in the purchase of the vehicles and any of the spares that go along with it. And it's a substantial step up for a lot of teams from the cars they've run previously, to come out in the middle of the season and, advise, oh, by the way, you're going to, make a fundamental change to the fuel that the cars run on and the manner in which you've got to budget for some of the longevity of the service items on the car. It's not really something that you can imagine a lot of the teams signing up to with any degree of enthusiasm, as has been reported in some other outlets.
Jeremy saying,
what about inside the engine?
Yeah, hang on, just to get Jeremy's questions. Was that anything to do with the refueling issues that they had in the early rounds? I imagine it would.
Yeah, so some of the teams did encounter some refueling issues, but a lot of that was to do with unfamiliarity with the system. The previous generation Siamese couplings, which I saw a bunch of in the pit lane at the Sydney 300 on the weekend, they're a reasonably straightforward system to use. They're fairly straightforward to service, and they do allow for a degree of misalignment as you get them in. But once they're in, they're kind of seated and held in by pressure. I think it's a Storbley, a very large diameter coaxial coupling on the new cars. It's like what you've seen on a lot of GT cars previously. I think most famously, there's one kind of canted off to one side on the front of the Porsche 991 GD3R. That's like right in the bonnet, easy to get to. But usually when they made the change to E85 back in 2009, they didn't actually have to make any changes inside the engine because the compression ratio stayed the same. So both before and so the maximum compression ratio in the 5-litre pushrod engines remained the same. It's a maximum compression ratio of 10-1. So when they switched to E85, the biggest thing they had to change on the engine was they had to massively increase the size of the injector, because in order to deliver the same calorific value of energy to burn with the same amount of oxygen, because the camshaft stayed the same, the valve stayed the same, so the amount of air going into the engine per revolution was the same. What changed was the amount of fuel you had to inject at that time. So with the fuel, the volume-wise, again, they measure it in kilos, but volumetrically, it was between 35 to 40% increase in fuel consumption, which is why we saw...
what I meant, but there's one other thing. Like the Drag and Drive guys have been running dual fuels for years, where they'll run a complete set of injectors, a complete separate tank, all like just for the ethanol for the event. The moment they hit the end of the track, it's switch over to petrol.
Correct.
Right? Or gasoline for the US guys, right? And they run that through the engine to keep the engine clean, because it's not just the breathing and the tuning, it's how does the ethanol affect the oil? How does it affect the bearings? Does it wash down the cylinders more? Does that increase wear and tear on the engine? What about the metallurgy of the pistons? The ethanol can eat them if they're made of the wrong material.
Correct. So there's less of an issue changing from E85 to E75 from an engine internals perspective. The same kind of things apply. So in a former life, when I had Motul as my oil partner for my racing. Motul's main brand of racing oil is 300V. It's a double ester technology. But there's very specific technical advice from Motul that you should not run that oil with E85, because the alcohol in the E85 breaks down double ester chain bonds in the oil, meaning all of that protection that you get from that very high-tech lubricant package disappears because it's broken down by the fuel. And everything you mentioned is the same. So we deal with what's called oil dilution. That's fuel in the oil. It's particularly a problem on diesel engines, but a diesel engine, by virtue of the way it's designed, can on a runaway actually start sucking the oil out of the sump and using that as a fuel. But yes, you're absolutely right for all of the teams when they changed from 98 RON to E85 back in the day. Those were all considerations. The biggest change, however, was on the fueling system. So they went from running, 2 small lift pumps and a single, what was then the Bosch 044, round about a 200 litre an hour pump. They ditched that. They went to 4 lift pumps in the boot-mounted fuel cell, and then they went to 2. I think it was a Bosch 979 pump, so about 175, 180 litres an hour, purely to keep up with the volume of fuel required to be delivered to the engine at full throttle, at close to 7,500 RPM.
Either way, it's obviously not a trivial. It's not a trivial thing to do in the middle of a series. So you would imagine that they're going to have to. Hey, listen, we better move on because we're getting towards the end of time now. Just quickly before we move on, it's looking more and more likely. In fact, I'd say it's probably we're just waiting for the official announcement that Supercars will be going onto the streets of Singapore next year for a round running in conjunction with the Singapore Grand Prix. That's certainly a mixed reaction from a lot of people. There's a lot of people. Ryan Walkinshaw, a huge fan of it, thinks it's a terrific idea.
If
Others,
they get paid for it,
they get.
then fantastic. If it makes financial sense for all of the teams, that they can pay their staff, they can get their cars over there, get them back, put them in the travel containers, put on a good show, achieve all the commercial aims that their corporate partners and their business-to-business relationship people want, fair play to them, absolutely. But if we go to Singapore and we don't go back to New Zealand, I bet there'll be a riot in Auckland and on the North Island.
Absolutely.
As it should be. Incidentally, Fritzy Garay, watching from Warsaw, Poland.
Hey.
Quickly, some motorbike news as well too. Casey Stoner was over at Goodwood. If anyone
he
did
was
catch the Goodwood, so he was
talking sense.
He was talking Aussie sense, talking very down to earth. He was Ducati must have paid for his coffees for his caffeine intake over there. So he was very high praise for the Ducati side of life, which is pretty dominant at the moment, which is no doubt, because obviously he was one of the ones. Well, he made a Ducati rideable back in the day when no one else could ride it. He was able to.
I think that was the point he was making as well. It's the fact that there were more challenges when he was riding it, and there was more input from the riders, because he was saying there's now so much in terms of electronic control, traction control, launch control, the aerodynamics is creeping in, more and more advanced aero is coming in.
Control.
So you just get on the bike, get on the bike, angle it the right way, and push a button. No, it's still a little bit harder than that. We're making a little bit of fun out of this, but however. He did have some high praise for two particular Ducati riders at the moment. One saying, I won't go into too much, go on and on and on, that Pecco is the benchmark, still obviously is the current world champion and still performing at a high level. And number two, he's put the hard word on Mr. Bezecchi. And he reckons if you take all those add-ons that Brett and I were just talking about and rode the bike raw, naked, he'd be able to throw that thing around better than everybody else. He's got some talent that everyone else has got coming up through the ranks.
I think
if you were riding a bike naked, I don't think you'd be riding very fast at all, because if you fell off, you'd get very hurt.
Yeah, you drag.
Think about that. Think about all the bugs.
Tires there, wouldn't you? You would.
Question for the panel: if we're listening to Casey Stoner as a with sage wisdom as a veteran of the sport, how old does that make us all feel?
He did retire early.
He did retire very early, yes. He did. I think
I'm padding it here.
Shut up, Dave.
The point there, Billy, but he wanted
Let me
to
tell you, once you hit 30, you don't care anymore.
Once you hit 30, no one cares about you anymore.
I think the thing is,
another criticism, but he is getting a few grey hairs in these goatee these days. Casey is, so
aren't we all?
Aren't we all? But yeah, so Casey, you're still looking a very young guy, but shave. If you want to look younger, get rid of the goatee.
Yeah, I think that he gave it away at such a young age, and the thing is, he hasn't really regretted it at all. I mean, he's still having fun. I mean, we know that he likes to get out
and take the kids along now.
He goes along and he has a bit of fun and still keeps up with it and still watches regularly and keeps abreast of what's happening. But I think they ask him to do
test ride. He does a test ride for Honda or Ducati when they ask him every now and again. Say, here's a few dollars to buy yourself another tinny and a few fishing rods.
Incidentally, what he did after what he got out of like a lot of motorcycle riders, he tried his hand at four wheels. So did Valentino Rossi, and Valentino won on the weekend. So congratulations to the doctor. He took a win in the. Took a win in the World GT World Challenge over in Europe, so well done to Valentino.
He hasn't lost his perseverance, has he?
No, that's for sure. Roy's saying still shocked Wayne Gardner isn't riding or racing anymore. You do have a look at some of these riders. I mean, the point is, as I said, when you've been around, sort of, like with the show within Pit Lane, and I can say now that I've spoken to. I'm now up to I haven't got to a fourth generation. I was thinking this the other day. I haven't got to a fourth generation as far as I know, because we've done 3 generations of Brabhams. We've done 3 generations of Davisons. We've done 3 generations of Stillwells, of course.
And then 3 generations of Richards, which, you know what, Clay...
Richards, yeah.
Still, Clay and Steve are still here in Melbourne, and Steve's building caravans, which is fantastic. But Jim's about sometimes as well, too. That'd be a bit of a little coup d'etat if we can get the whole 3 of them on the show at one stage or another.
Coup d'etat?
Ooh.
Yeah. I'm not sure that the coup d'etat... That's a bit
to
of a
everybody
worry,
else, to everybody else, I'm saying if we could swing that one.
There, so incidentally, Jeremy's pointing out NASCAR for SVG, then Brody Kostecki running at Indianapolis with Richard Childress Racing
with no test beforehand.
Yes, and with the support, the financial support of Peter Adderton for his Mobile X, but also pointing out, Jeremy saying don't ride bikes. Hashtag life advice. So
I'll pass that information on. I'll pass it on to Graham Blundell, who was obviously Elvin Purple. He used to do a lot of nude stuff. I'll make sure he doesn't ride any bikes.
Just remember, kids, when it comes to wearing leathers, it's just like wearing something else. If it's not on, it's not on.
Incidentally, Jeremy, talking about John. Yes, talking about John Britton. I'd love to find that footage. We did a story on his bike, came out here, and we did a story with where we had a good look at one of his bikes out here years ago, and boy, that was a work of art. What a genius that man was! Absolutely.
Wasn't that at Motor Classica or something at the Royal Exhibition Buildings?
No, it was up at. I think it was part of. Might have been at the old Arthur Seat Hill climb. Because it was at a hill climb or something similar. It was so long ago now, but I remember that they brought it out, and there was also a book, a really, really good book, which somewhere I've got a copy of around here about his work and about the design of those bikes and other things. Very much like the story of Bugatti. I mean, you remember, Stuart, when we went to the National Gallery of Victoria and did the filming of. The Bugatti, and what an experience that was. I mean, to be let into Stuart and I were just let into the National Gallery, into the Bugatti exhibition, and I said, "Tell us when you're finished, guys," and walked out. It was just me, Stuart, and a couple of cameras, and millions of dollars worth of Bugattis. It was amazing.
Millions,
and not just car stuff. Not just car stuff. The stuff from the whole design,
sculpture, the artwork, everything,
furniture, paintings, you name it. It was just.
And John Britton was very much like that as well. He had some amazing. He designed buildings. He designed all sorts of things. So very much in that thing, that sort of.
Anyway, IndyCar's also on this weekend at Iowa as well too.
Yes, we had the IndyCars at Canada, Toronto last week. Scott McLaughlin started from second, but had some issues and sort of in the pits and with strategy and fell back a little bit, but did pretty well.
IMSA's at Lion Rock this weekend as well.
Yeah, we've got quite a few things.
The GT end of IMSA series, none of the 3 prototype classes.
And it's always a really good race, that one too, and you'll be able to watch that live on IMSA.tv. So if you it's strange hours, but you will be able to watch it, and
that's some World Rally crossover in the UK as well too. There you go.
Yeah, and also
Goodwood was great.
Goodwood was fantastic.
Except for the weather on the Saturday
going up the hill.
Yeah. Mike Roddy was there.
Oh, Michael, was it? Yes.
Where did I see that?
I did see that. Yes, that's right. I did see. There was a post on Facebook. I think didn't his son get married as well too? I think.
Jordan?
No, he's been married for a while.
Oh, there was a post. There was a post this week from Mike Roddy about his son or something or other. So
Both of them were there. The car was there, and so was Armin Hahn and John Goss.
Oh, that was good. Yes, that was terrific. Yeah. That was there. Also, there was. I didn't see the run. I don't know whether it made. There certainly was planned to run, but also the McLaren M10B, the Repco powered McLaren M10B of Frank Matic was there, and Derek Neller, who was Frank's mechanic for many years, and we did a two-part special with Derek a few years ago, which is on the In Pit Lane YouTube channel, Memories of Matic with Derek Neller. Great chat with him, so go there. And speaking of two-part interviews, coming up this week on In Pit Lane, Thursday night at 9 o'clock on Channel 31 Melbourne, you will see the second part of my chat with Ian Smith as well. This week we talk about some of the not just some of his memories of motorsport, but some of the more recent things that he's done. Some of the technology. There's a bit of there's a bit of camera nerd stuff if you're interested in that sort of thing. Some of the technology he's using now, and the transition from the days of film through to what he's doing now with digital cameras, but also talking about his time behind the wheel, which includes pretty much every genre of motorsport you can think of. He did circuit racing, drag racing, hill climbs, rallying, a lot of rallying, but lots of. Also, we talked a bit about surfing as well. I mean, he was a surfer back in the day, bit of a surf nut back in the day as well. So that's coming up this Thursday night on the In Pit Lane on In Pit Lane on Channel 31 and the In Pit Lane YouTube channel, and then on the YouTube channel we've got even more stuff coming up. Some great bonus stuff where we just sit there and basically go through the scrapbook and have a chat about that.
Just a quick update on what you just mentioned. It was I can't find it yet, but they said that Frank Matic's son Chris was going to drive it at the M10B at the Goodwood. So I'm trying to look for videos to see if they actually.
Yeah, I haven't seen any footage. I know they started it up and revved it up, and I've seen some footage of that, but I hadn't seen because I didn't have the time to sort of sit through the lot. And as you say, Saturday was cancelled. And so really all I've seen is the highlights. The good news is the live stream, all the stuff that they put up over the weekend is basically on a loop the whole time on that on the Goodwood YouTube channel, and you can just basically go over there. So if you've got nothing to do, if you've got something on, you want something on in the background while you're vacuuming the floor or something like that, whack it on and you've got hours and hours.
While you're building a velodrome for the games that you're not doing anymore.
Yes. Anyway, guys, I think we better call it. We're now over an hour.
Well,
and yes, and we're sort of 1 hour. We're probably coming up to lunch. Unfortunately, 2 wickets have fallen. Australia are now 2 for 78. Dave Warner out for 32. And Usman Khawaja went very early for 3. Currently, Marcus Labuschagne 23 not out, and Steve Smith 10 not out. So there you go. You can tell we're live by the. You get everything that you'd want here on Full Course Yellow, including live cricket scores. Okay, everyone, thanks for joining us. Hopefully we'll see you on Thursday on In Pit Lane. Until then, thanks for watching us, and we'll catch you next week. Terrific.
Have a great
Terrific to have you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Evening, gents.